Hello, and thanks for joining us. I'm Kevin Nealon. Our top story tonight, it appears congratulations are in order. We are monitoring things closely as details continue to come in, but it seems, yes, I have confirmation. We're talking about you, Joseph. Congratulations. You really outdid yourself this time, which probably wasn't that hard. Our team has discovered footage from one of the many celebrations taking place in your honor. Stay away from drugs, kids. Now for some deeper analysis, let's go live via satellite to our special guest commentator, Other Kevin. Other Kevin, what are your thoughts on all this? Speechless, Kevin. Wow. Just wow. Insightful as always. Thank you. Well, I'm now being told that we are out of time and that I should pull this lever. I'm Kevin Nealon. Thanks for watching. Take care, Jimmy. Thanks, Bob.
Joseph Jaffe is not famous. I'm kind of famous. I'm Jerry Springer. And Jaffe is no host. He'd be lucky to be in my audience, let alone on my show. Well, maybe he's crazy enough to be on my show. I take that back. And that's not a good thing.
Am I being overconfident? Am I becoming complacent about complacency?
I think you are.
Oh, he's not the Messiah, he's just a very naughty boy.
Yeah, I've got big ears.
Brian just wanted to see anyone else. Piss off!
That's the one. Because you literally complete me, and we complete each other.
You've obviously encountered discrimination in your own life by virtue of being Australian.
Hey, Manuel Kant was a real pissant who was very rarely stable.
I don't want to get too gushy, but I might just be saying you complete me, Dean. PNG now stands for Pritchard and Good.
Branding is not a bad blind date.
Look at you! You are insane!
How did I do that?
You're
How
insane!
did I do that? You're insane! Yes. It's Thursday night. It is April 21st. It's night time. This is Late Night Jaffe. I have the daddy juice with me. Yes, it's grape juice. It's grape juice, exactly. But I need to be of sound body and mind because we've got a great show for you tonight. We've got the legendary and the famous Daniel Pink. Of course, the show is called Joseph Jaffe is Not Famous. And why would I be when I have amazing guests on the show? Daniel will be up shortly. But first, a little bit of alpha and breaking news. I am launching my hold economy in the Jaffe economy. What does that mean? I'm trying to figure it out myself. And when I figure it out, I will let you know. I'm just kidding. Actually, let's go back from fans and let's talk about regulars. If you hold one Jaffe coin, my cryptocurrency, my creator coin, you will become what's known as a regular in the Discord. That means you will have access to the entire show's channels. You'll have a calendar of upcoming guests 1 month in advance, guest bios, an opportunity to actually ask questions to guests in advance via text, which I'll then read out, access to pre-tapings, and even access to after shows. You need more than that? More, you ask? Sure. You can become a fan at 10 Jaffe coin. What you will now be eligible is to get free Jaffe coin. Every time I put that little QR code up, which is what you see right now. Right now, people, thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands of people are getting free Jaffe coin, but you need to hold 10 Jaffe coin. So when you get the fan roll in Discord, what that means is you're now eligible to get free coin as well as your never-ending part of the ability to win an NFT every single week. I'm giving away an NFT. Now, if you're prepared to upgrade at some point to the insider role, that's 25 Jaffe coin. You will now have access to and download 60-second highlight videos of every show. You will now get show notes and an episode summary. You are an insider to the show. If you upgrade to 50 Jaffe coin, you become a VIP, which now means you get a backstage pass to hang with myself 30 minutes before the show and my guest 15 minutes before the show. As a VIP, you can actually spend time with myself, with my guest, maybe even ask a couple of questions in the green room. And finally, the highest level is what's known as a super fan. I'll have monthly calls, brainstorm calls. You're actually an advisor to the show where we'll debrief and you can come up with ideas for the show. You can come up with recommendations in terms of segments for the show or guests on the show. And once a month, you'll actually be able to make a cameo on the show to ask the guest a question. So you're not just a passive member of the audience anymore. You're now very much an active part of the whole ecosystem. So I'm so happy and proud to launch this holding economy. And if you go into my not famous Discord right now, which is bit.ly/not famous Discord, you can actually do what's called, you go to, well, you'll see what to do, but you'll be able to go and query how many Jaffe coin you have, and automatically you will get these roles. So I'll be talking more about that, but it's exciting because what it really allows you to do, remember, you hold the coin. I don't have it. It's yours. You can sell it at any time, but as long as you hold the coin, and who knows what happens to that coin, you will get all of the benefits. Now, here's some more benefits. The Creator Economy Expo is coming up May 2nd through 4th in Phoenix, Arizona. And my guest tonight, Daniel Pink, is one of the keynotes. You will be able to see him in person. You might even be able to network a little bit with him. But more importantly, you get a sneak preview of what that show looks like and what his keynote might sound like. If you use the code Jaffe or not famous, you will get $200 off your pass. You will get a walk-on role. I will be doing a live taping of my show on May 3rd and 4th, and you'll be able to make a cameo and drinks with me on me. Maybe Daniel will even crash the party, and the more the merrier. So we'll be doing a little private drinks as well. So this week we had Alliestrasza, who will be at CEX. We have Daniel Pink, who will be at CEX. And a little sneak preview for next week's guests. We have Elliot Koss, Jason Keith, David Dylan Thomas, and Amanda Russell. And that is what's to look forward to next week. Tomorrow, NFT Fridays, we have the folks over at Tribe X NFT. An amazing story of how they had 400 ETH. That's about $1.2 million stolen from them the day that they actually launched. And instead of running away, running for the hills, they decided to stay and fight, relaunch, and keep going with their vision. No regrets. No regrets. I mean, I'm sure huge regrets in terms of what happened and why it happened. But you know what? You can lament about the past. You can stand still or you can move forward. And of course, I'll do a drawing for Ali Sabet's incredible artist, his NFT. Well, that's a lot of homework or housekeeping or handiwork, whatever you want to call it. Now, I hope you don't regret that introduction, but now it's time for the seated soliloquy. The seated soliloquy is called Regrets. Now, look, I don't want to get biblical on you, but there is a story about in the Testament. I don't know whether it's old, new, refurbished, beta, about a gentleman by the name of Lot and his wife, and they leave the doomed cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they are told not to look back. If they look back, something awful will happen to them. Lot's wife looks back, and she's turned into a pillar of salt. Now, I heard, and I don't know whether it's an old wives' tale or an old husband's tale, or maybe, I don't know, the tale of the fox, head of the dog, whatever. But I heard actually that Lot looked back as well. But why did he not turn into a pillar of salt? Well, here was the explanation that I once heard. He was an architect. He was a philanthropist. He was someone who built these towns. He looked back, but he did not look back in regret. He looked back with pride. He looked back to see the fruits of his labor, the product of his work. And he looked back being able to say, this is what I created, but now it's time to move forward. And maybe, just maybe, that's why he was spared. Now, again, I don't know whether the story is true or not. I wasn't there. I don't know if I would have looked back or not. But I think it really speaks to this idea that the things that happen in your life do not happen to you. They happen for you. And then I heard another build, I think this week on the show, or maybe they're happening through you. Not to you, not for you, but through you. That you become a vessel in order to be able to harness, to focus, to transform, to hold, to amplify, and ultimately to pay it forward. That these things that happen through you are designed to help others. I love that idea as a teacher, as a writer, an author, a professor, an adjunct professor. I don't think I'll ever become a professor. But the fact that we are on this planet, on this earth, whether we're an author, a best-selling author like Daniel Pink, and we have the ability to inspire, to motivate, sometimes through other people's anecdotes, and sometimes through our own personal pain, the school of hard knocks, the things that didn't go according to plan, that hopefully, as the old saying goes, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. And I don't even think that statement even holds water anymore, because it's not about what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. It's the fact that all of these things, even if they didn't create a flesh wound, were designed to make me wiser and make other people around me stronger. So that is my thoughts, my inspiration. But now you get to hear from the expert himself, Daniel Pink. Daniel Pink is the author of 5 New York Times bestsellers, including his latest, The Power of Regret, How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward. And it was published just a couple of months ago. His other books include the New York Times bestsellers, When and A Whole New Mind. I'm sure you've read them, as well as the #1 New York Times bestsellers, Drive and To Sell as Human. Dan's books have won multiple awards, have been translated into 42 languages, and have sold millions of copies around the world. He lives in Washington, D.C. with his family, and he's getting on a train very early in the morning. So we thank him for joining us for a bit of Late Night Jaffe. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You are very, very welcome. And I'm very much looking forward to your keynote at CEX. But more importantly, you are guest number 366. It's one day better than 365 days, because I guess you get the leap year as well.
Yeah, it's a leap year day. Absolutely.
So welcome to the show. We know that time is limited. And so even though there's so much amazing content to get through, I would be remiss if I didn't share some fun facts about you in a segment that we call Fun Facts. And what we found out is, #1, that you wear shorts year round. Now,
I do.
I'm not sure if we can confirm that this in fact is you. But
no, my legs are much more muscular.
That's what I was thinking as well. Now, will you be wearing shorts when you keynote at CX?
Probably not.
But have you ever worn shorts when you've keynoted at?
I don't really use keynote as a verb, so it's hard for me to figure that out.
So what would the verb be? Just espouse?
Yeah, espouse. I like espouse. Espouse is a very good verb.
All right. So when you espouse, maybe you'll surprise a few people and wear some shorts. Here's something else we found out about you, is that you are in fact a skilled bartender and clearly got sunburned.
And friends with a very young Tom Cruise.
A very young, well, due to formaldehyde, I'm pretty sure that he does not age.
Yeah.
In fact, he may not be alive as far as we're concerned, but he's still doing his thing. So as a skilled bartender, do you have a go-to cocktail?
I think my favorite cocktail is what's called a boulevardier. You know that drink?
Gesundheit.
A boulevardier is like a Negroni, but with whiskey.
All right, I'm prepared if at CX to try one of those. If I'm not going to ask you to make it.
Yeah, not every bartender knows that drink, but it's one of my favorites. Everybody knows a Negroni. It's like a Negroni is usually with gin. Boulevardier is with whiskey, preferably in my view rye. It's very easy to make. I mean, it's 2 parts whiskey, 1 part Campari, 1 part sweet vermouth, and some bitters.
All right, so the man is not just a talented author and thought leader and a spouser and short wearer. He's also a bartender. Robert Collins says, well done, young Flanagan. And also comments, he says, oh my, those knees. Cyrus Crone is here. And Steve Jordan says, a little bit of After Dark, Jaffe. It's generally a little bit more chilled After Dark, no doubt. So if you really needed more fun facts about Dan Pink, well, you've come to the right place, because Dan once played Rumpelstiltskin in a school play. We actually have a photo
there it is.
Of that moment. This clearly is one of your 3 fun facts. So you felt it important enough to be able to share with millions of viewers. Exactly what was it about Rumpelstiltskin that has stayed with you to this day? Or nothing?
You know what? I'm not sure. I don't think I remember any of my lines, but obviously it had a searing imprint, left a searing imprint on my psyche.
Well, I guess, I'll tell you one thing in all seriousness, Dan, that these fun facts, a little bit of an icebreaker, there's never been a set of fun facts that I haven't found a connection or something to riff on. And I guess maybe in the story of Rumpelstiltskin, there was the ability to turn straw into gold. I feel like that story has to have the word regret in there somewhere, in terms of being able to turn, I guess, the lemons into lemonade. There's got to be something that I think maybe has informed and stayed with you to even present day in the book. Or is that a stretch?
It's a stretch.
It's a stretch. Well, it was worth a try. But I want to talk to you a little bit about, obviously, this new book. And I was saying to you in the green room that one of the things that I've always found is that the really, really great authors, and it's not just authors, they are storytellers, they're thought leaders, have the ability to not just encapsulate the entire book into a heading and a subheading. And God knows I've tried, flip the funnel, retention is the new acquisition, blah, blah, blah. I've tried, but like the tipping point for me was like one of those moments. Your books are absolutely that as well. It's that also combined with the ability to tap into the zeitgeist at the exact right moment and the exact right time. And I think people are just filled with all of this. I would love for you to set up the book and the premise of the book that isn't already obvious from a very succinct and a very compelling headline and subhead.
Well, I mean, the book, as you say, Joe, is called The Power of Regret: How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward. And the premise of it is relatively simple. This is a book about an emotion, what I think is our most misunderstood emotion, which is regret, which is not an emotion that we enjoy. It's a stomach churning emotion. It's an emotion that makes us feel bad when we look backward and say, oh, if only I had taken that route, if only I had made the decision, if only I hadn't done that thing, the present would be better and the future brighter. And my argument in this book, based on a considerable amount of research, my own and 60 years of science, is that we've gotten regret totally wrong. We think that regret makes us weak. It doesn't have to. I think it can make us strong. We think that regret is something to avoid. I actually think it's something to embrace. We think that we should be positive all the time. I don't agree with that. I think there's room for negativity. I think negativity is functional. We think we should look forward all the time. I actually think there's strength in looking backward. And so what this research tells us is that, and I'll shut up here in a moment, are 2 big things. One, Everybody has regrets. Regret makes us human. Everybody has regrets. It's one of the most common emotions that human beings have. The only people who lack regrets, the only people who truly have no regrets, are little kids because their brains haven't developed, people with brain damage, and sociopaths. Everybody else has regrets. And the reason everybody has regrets is the second point, which is that regret, if we treat it right, is useful. It's functional. It's helpful. It clarifies. It instructs. There's a pile of evidence showing that if we deal with our regrets properly, we can become better negotiators, better strategists, better problem solvers, better parents, better seekers of meaning. And so what I'm trying to do in this book is reclaim regret as our most transformative emotion, because we've totally gotten it wrong.
I'm trying to get my head around the idea of connecting kids with brain damage and sociopaths. The easy one to eliminate is sociopaths, and it's probably very natural for you, given the fact that you live in Washington, D.C. You're surrounded by many
I'm
of
surrounded by sociopaths, yes.
No doubt. And I think in seriousness about brain damage is it's not a lack of wanting, it's a lack of capacity in terms of not being able to feel. And with kids, I suppose it's a naivety, a naivete perhaps.
No, it's not. With kids, it's not naivete. It actually has to do more fundamentally with brain development. The reason that 5-year-olds, for instance, can't experience regret is that regret requires significant cognitive dexterity. When we experience regret, we're doing something kind of amazing. We are in our heads traveling through time. We're traveling backward. That's an amazing thing. Then we are remembering what happened. We are then changing the narrative of what really happened. Then we're getting back in our time machine. We're going forward and saying, oh, suddenly the present is reconfigured because of the decisions I made in that reimagined past. That requires incredible cognitive dexterity. 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds their brains haven't developed enough to do that. What's more is that people with lesions in the orbital frontal cortex of their brain, that interferes with the ability to process regret. Certain kinds of Huntington's disease interferes with the ability to process regret. Certain kinds of Parkinson's interferes with the ability to process regret. Certain kinds of schizophrenia interferes with that. And so the point here, Joe, is that regret is part of our cognitive machinery. Let me say that again. Regret is part of our cognitive machinery. It's part of our brains. It's part of how we think. It's part of who we are, because if we treat it properly, it's useful.
So regret is part of our cognitive machinery. So we have the capacity to be able to exercise it, to utilize it. I'm assuming it's therefore something that can be trained, can be honed, can be mastered, can be, or maybe to put it differently, there's no excuse for not being able to use it properly.
Well, I mean, the excuse is, you're right. The excuse is that no one's ever taught us how to do it properly. And so the problem is, and we have, I think, a bigger problem. There's a broader problem here, is that we, especially here in America, haven't been taught how to deal with negative emotions very well. And regret is one of our most common, is arguably our most common negative emotion. It's one of our most common emotions of any kind whatsoever. And so typically what happens when we feel that negative emotion, because we've been sold this bill of goods, we want to ignore it. So we put our finger, no regrets, no regrets. I don't have any regrets. Nope. Never think positive. Always think positive. Always look forward. Never look backward. All right. That is a bad idea. That goes against 60 years of science. It's not an effective recipe for living. What's more, though, is that sometimes when we can no longer hold off those negative emotions, when we can no longer bat away the regret, because we're ill-equipped to deal with it, those regrets come in and they debilitate us. And so we wallow in our regrets. We ruminate on our regrets. That's a bad idea too. What we want to do is not ignore our regrets and not wallow in our regrets, but confront them, think about them, use them as signals, as information, as knowledge, as data. And when we do that, as I said before, the benefits are considerable.
You know, I have a feeling that you probably think very, very carefully about word choice and every single, especially in the cover of a book. And this idea of looking backward, you spoke about being a time traveler, but I guess you're not being the time traveler, which sounds exhausting. And if you've ever seen The Fly, doesn't always end very well. But But this idea of looking backward, I guess, means you're still grounded in the present. You're still where you're meant to
point,
be.
yeah. Well, I mean, you are. I mean, you are. It's an interesting point. I mean, you're looking backward, and you're looking. I guess your eyes remain in place, but your mind is actually transported. And our ability to think counterfactually is a superpower. It requires, as I said before, it requires incredible cognitive firepower to imagine things that didn't exist, to conjure events that run counter to what actually happened. It's unlikely. This is a hard thing to prove, but it's unlikely that raccoons can do this, that squirrels can do this, that goldfish can do it, that iguanas can do it. I think it's equally unlikely that pigs and dogs and gorillas can do it. I think it's a unique capacity of our brains, this ability to think counterfactually, and you have to say, if we have an ability, then you have to say, well, it must serve some purpose, or else evolution wouldn't have selected for it. And what this ability of counterfactual thinking does, particularly these so-called upward counterfactuals, where we imagine how things could have been better, is that it helps us improve, it helps us grow, it helps us learn, it helps us avoid mistakes in the future.
Vicky's Navor is here. She's been a guest on the show. She said, "Love your work, Dan."
Thank you, Vicky.
And Robert Collins says, "Everything we've done, the hardships and experiences we've encountered, make us stronger and wiser if we're wise enough to learn, adapt from those lessons."
I agree with Robert completely. I want to put a giant red circle around the word "if," because as I said before, many of us aren't taught to do that effectively, and this is a not insignificant problem. You know, I have people in this book that I wrote who have tattoos that say "no regrets," right? Because they believe this philosophy of endless positivity, of always looking forward so deeply that they enshrine this philosophy on their bodies. That is a big commitment. The problem with that is that if you believe that you should not have regrets, then you're essentially saying, I'm not interested in learning, I'm not interested in growing. Once again, everybody has regrets. Now, as Robert is saying, the key is to take your regrets and face them, confront them, extract lessons from them, and do better in the future. When we do that, as Robert is saying, it is a powerful, powerful emotion.
Now, I'm assuming that you know this, that you've seen this before, but if you haven't, you can thank me later. But I'm assuming that I'm gonna actually, as a betting man, say you've seen this before. That there's actually a famous meme, not even a meme, but there's a real photo of someone that has a tattoo on them that says "no regrets."
Yeah, there's also a scene in a movie called We're the Millers that I write about in the book, about someone with a tattoo that's misspelled. And so, yeah, so exactly, there are people with tattoos that are misspelled. But I mean, I think the better story is a real life story of someone I have in the book. His name is Jeff Bosley, who got a tattoo that said "no regrets," properly spelled. He got a tattoo that said "no regrets." Then he regretted it and had his tattoo removed.
Exactly. So if someone, by the way, has a tattoo on that says "no regrets," should they regret it or not at this point?
You know what? I have enough of a libertarian streak that I'm going to say, you do you.
I want to go back to this. You indeed. I want to go back to this idea, because if I'm just paraphrasing or reframing, we have to have regrets, but we have to be able to channel them and learn from them.
Exactly.
And so the pain. I mean, not a day goes by that I don't have a regret about Bitcoin or these moments in time when I was at this fork in the road, as Yogi would have said, and I didn't take it, and I don't know what I did. What happens when you have a recurring regret? When you keep on going back to the same place, how do you move forward from that? And I'm not saying that it holds me back, but it's this moment. It's like a recurring nightmare or even a recurring dream.
Yeah, it's a really great question, and I think it's going to depend on why it's recurring. The fact that it's recurring is a signal, and so what it's a signal of. Regret is a signal. It's a signal about what we value and it's instruction about how to do better in the future. So to me, that strikes me, and I don't know because I'm not a psychoanalyst, that if you have a recurring regret, chances are it is something that you value, that you haven't fully reckoned with, how much you value it, and you actually haven't sufficiently extracted the lesson from it. You haven't actually learned from it. And so what you have is this endless cycle of things recurring. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that what you're describing isn't quite rumination, but isn't not rumination. And rumination is dangerous. Rumination brings us down. And one way to arrest the march toward rumination that often occurs when people have regrets is a practice called self-compassion, which is built on the work of Kristen Neff at the University of Texas. Self-compassion essentially says this, that we should treat ourselves as generously as we treat anybody else. So a lot of times when we make mistakes, when we screw up, the way we talk to ourselves internally is brutal, it's cruel, it's vicious. Our self-talk is often absurdly mean-spirited. We talk to ourselves in ways we would never talk to anybody else. And so the remedy for that, Joe, is don't do that. Instead, it's like the old joke about the guy who goes to the doctor and the doctor says, it hurts when the guy says, it hurts when I do this. And the doctor says, don't do that. So the remedy is, though, to treat yourself with kindness. So you have a mistake, a screw up, a regret. Treat yourself with kindness rather than contempt. Recognize that your mistakes are part of the human condition. You're not that special. I have a database of 20,000 regrets I've collected from 109 countries around the world. Every single regret someone tells me about, I got someone else on the planet who has the exact same one. So you're not that special. And then the third thing is recognize that any screw up you make, and this is a big problem that people have in coping and in dealing with negative emotions, is that they have a mistake, a screw up, a regret, a setback, and they take that moment and use that moment as the full measure of their lives, which is debilitating. So again, you can arrest the march toward rumination with something called self-compassion.
I'm suddenly thinking that if the book had not been called The Power of Regret, it might have been called Don't Do That. But it's very simple. It's like, and I guess it's human nature as well that we keep. Well, I mean, you probably know the story of the study that was done with, I think it was 4 chimpanzees and a bunch of bananas up the pole with the cold water that squirted all over them, and as one went up, you know which one I'm talking about? I'll try and say it as quickly as I can. 4 chimps in a room. A big bunch of ripe bananas at the top. First one goes up, and as he's 2/3 up the pole, jets come on and douse him with ice cold water. Scampers down, slides down the pole, he shivers and hides in a corner. Next one goes and tries, same thing happens. Third one's a little bit more cautious, kind of goes up, and they're all watching, same thing happens. And by the time the 4th one comes, he's not going to go up the pole. He knows exactly what's going to happen. But what actually happens is, one by one, the original chimps are taken out the room and new ones come in. And eventually, I guess the way it goes is you end up with a bunch of chimpanzees all afraid to do something, but no one knowing why. So they've all been trained, and they've all been told through lore and folklore and whatever, and just, the I guess, broken telephone, and they're too afraid to do something, and they're not quite sure why, just because of the way things. So it just made me think of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I don't know the study you're talking about, and I'm still not clear on how the second round of chimps learned from that first round of chimps. But leaving that aside, what you're describing is what is often known as learned helplessness. And Martin Seligman, who's one of the founders of positive psychology, actually began his research career studying learned helplessness, which is that if people can be, he was actually using animals like dogs, can be conditioned to believe they have no efficacy, they have no control over their environment. And even if they're presented with a situation where they do have that efficacy, they learn to be helpless. And he actually, and so that's an interesting phenomenon right there. The other thing that Seligman did, though, is that he said, well, if people can learn, if beings can learn to be helpless, then maybe they can learn to be optimistic too. And so he used that as a pivot into the whole field, the now very influential field of positive psychology. So
the missing link, just to tell you that you were missing, is the fact that when each chimp came in, there was at least a chimp there that witnessed it either themselves.
Okay, got it. So that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's funny how basically even generationally, culturally, we end up just following a certain code.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, it's it's sort of like, I mean, it's part of it is part of it is social norms. When we primates look around about how to behave, when we primates are deciding how to behave, we don't say, I'm going to behave the way I want to behave. Sometimes we do that, but many times we look around. Look around for cues. How does it work around here? How am I supposed to behave around here? And so to me, it makes perfect sense that our very near cousins, chimpanzees, would be somewhat similar.
We always hear about the relationship between risk and reward. And I'm wondering if there's a relationship, I assume there is, between risk and regret. And the ability for us, if regret is the looking backward and the risk is the moving forward, is there a connection between the two that almost can allow us to be more risk inclined, or conversely becoming more risk averse?
Maybe. I mean, one of the things that you see, again, in my research and also in the existing academic research, is that regrets of inaction outnumber regrets of action by a wide margin, particularly as people get older. When we're young, in our 20s, we have equal numbers of regrets of inaction, what we didn't do, and regrets of action, what we did do. But as we age, the inaction regrets take over. And I think what that tells us is that we haven't fully or properly calibrated risk, to put it into your domain that you're talking about here. And that we sometimes overstate how much risk we're facing. And when we look back, we realize it actually wasn't that risky and that I should have taken the chance. And so the fact that these inaction regrets outnumber action regrets by such a wide margin, to me, suggests that a remedy is to have a slight bias for action, that we should just do stuff. I see again, I mentioned earlier that I've collected over 20,000 regrets from people in 109 countries. And one of the big regrets are regrets of boldness. If only I'd taken the chance. And these are regrets about people who didn't ask somebody out on a date, regrets about people who didn't travel, regrets about people who didn't start a business. And those are classic regrets about inaction. And to me, a lesson of those boldness regrets is to have a bias for action, to in general tilt a little bit more toward doing stuff and trying stuff, and actually push back against what might be our natural propensity to overweight losses and underweight gains.
Really well said. Robert Collins said it's the tale of five monkeys. And I guess this is the punchline, because that's the way we always have done things. And that's obviously used very much with respect to red tape, bureaucracy, corporate legacy, etc., incumbent thinking. I always find a quote for my guests. This is the quote that I found for you. Make the most of your regrets, never smother your sorrow, but tend and cherish it till it comes to have a separate and integral interest. To regret deeply is to live afresh. And this was not a previous guest on the show. This was Henry David Thoreau.
Yeah.
The quote.
I do know the quote. And I think that last line is really telling. To regret deeply is to live afresh. That if we don't regret, we can't shed past behavior. You think about it almost like that. If we don't regret, if we don't look back and scrutinize our previous choices, then we're not going to learn very much. We're not going to shed our old selves. We're not going to be able to learn and grow and advance. And when we learn and grow and advance, we actually become, I think, new people. And I think that's what Thoreau meant when he said living afresh.
And it's also this idea of a deep regret, which is not a superficial. It's
exactly.
It's
very good point.
I actually had I had a professional basketball player in the studio, in my virtual studio, and he actually spoke about funnily enough, he may as well have been talking about regret. He spoke about having a season-ending injury. And he said, what happens is when you have that injury, all you want is you wish it away. All you want is to be able to get back on the court, get back to normal. And instead, what he does is he kind of, it's not that he wallows in it, but he really feels the intensity of the pain, of the frustration, of what's happening, so that he can triangulate from that and move forward. And he said, instead of always wishing away the bad, kind of like really suck it up, or suck it in, I should say, so that you actually have a reference point or a benchmark.
I mean, it's an interesting way. It's a super interesting way to look at it, and I think it's revealing when we think about something like regret. You know, as I said, it's very clear to me that regret clarifies what we value, and it instructs us on how to do better. And all of us want that clarification, and all of us want that instruction. But the other thing about regret is that it doesn't feel good. It's uncomfortable. It hurts. And so we want that clarification and instruction, but we want it without the discomfort and pain. And it doesn't work that way. It's a package deal. And so the more that we recognize that discomfort is part of life, and discomfort can be a signal for growth, the better off we are.
So I don't even feel like I need to ask you about CX, because we know what you're going to be talking about. You're going to, in addition, be talking about why regret makes us human, why regret makes us better, why regret clarifies, and I think we spoke about that, what we value. Is there anything that you want to add in terms of what people can expect and look forward to at CX?
Well, at that one, I'm going to be having a conversation on stage with Brian Clark, one of the impresarios of that gathering. And the interesting thing about Brian, or it's not that interesting, but is that 20 years ago, I wrote a book called Free Agent Nation about the rise of people working for themselves. It was my first book. I obviously wrote it when I was a teenager. The book came out in 2001. And it was about the rise of people working for themselves. And to write that book, I interviewed people all over the country who had gone out to work for themselves. And I was in Austin, Texas, and I interviewed a guy named Brian Clark. And so Brian appears in the pages of Free Agent Nation, and Brian and I are going to have a scintillating and robust and takeaway laden conversation about the 20-year path from Free Agent Nation to the creator economy.
I have to go into my archives, and there it is. I think this is Free Agent. Did I find
that's the audio book, but that's fine. You can buy that. You can check out the paperback.
This reminds me of a
paperback. Go to the paperback. The paperback is still in print.
Oh, I can do that. There we
go.
It reminds me of the late Benny Hill had a skit that remember the book Watership Down, and it said, Watership Down, you've read the book, you've seen the movie, you've bought the T-shirt, now eat the pie. That was one of the more politically correct skits. Let me ask you one more question in the time that we have. Let's go back to the idea of Free Agent Nation.
Yes, sir.
Let's talk about the people that have been lifers, that have dedicated their entire life to get that gold Rolex, to get the retirement party, that have been laid off now, or the people that maybe did retire and they look back and they go, if only, if. What's your thought just in terms of now with the great resignation happening post COVID? I'm sure from a corporate employment standpoint, people are just filled with the bad kind of regrets.
Maybe it's hard to say. I'm not totally clear on what's going on here. I think part of the Great Resignation is that labor market tightened, and people looked at their jobs and realized they had pretty crappy jobs and they wanted out. They weren't being treated fairly. They weren't being paid well, and so they wanted out. I think part of it also is that after 2 years of a pandemic, which is just a kind of a crazy thing to fathom, that people were confronting their mortality and were saying, "Good God, it's like I'm not going to be here forever. I might as well step up and do something." So I think that was. I do think that was part of it. One of the big regrets, though, that people have is one of the big career regrets people have is not taking chances, not being entrepreneurial, not starting things. And it goes to your point, Joe, about risk. I feel people are not calibrating the risk properly. They're actually overestimating how much risk there is in change, and underestimating how much risk there is in the status quo.
My whole, I use these quotes all the time from my old world in advertising. Bill Bernbach said, "Safe advertising is the riskiest advertising of all." And then, of course, there's that great Peter Drucker quote, which is, "Defending the past is far greater risk than creating the future."
Sure.
So that comment is absolutely valid.
Yeah, but I actually think that the way you're talking about it is an interesting way to talk about it. So let's talk about it in terms of risk, because risk is a mathematical concept, right? Risk is basically a probability, and I think when people think about doing new things and being bold, the probability of success is, I think they often assign it too low. Not always, but they assign it too low. And the risk of staying where you are right now, they don't realize is higher than they think.
I'm definitely ruminating on it as well. I remember even saying to my wife at one point, she was being sponsored. She was being sponsored for a green card, and I'm going to take that subtle nonverbal cue as it's time to wrap up. But she was being she was being sponsored for a green card, but at the same time she was being hopelessly underpaid by her boss. And she said, "I'm going to walk in and I'm going to demand a raise." And I said to her, "What's the worst thing that can happen?"
Exactly.
And she said, "Well, I could be fired and I could not get my green card." I said, "Can you live with that?" She said, "No." I said, "Well, there's your answer." And so, like, part of the way I look at it is, when risk is mitigated and known versus reward is unmitigated, or at least unknown and limitless, it gives you a different frame. I mean, I think it speaks to what you're saying, which is, the devil we know is, I lose money, it doesn't work, I fail, I start again. But, to the victor goes the spoils. There could be unlimited return.
I think that is sound, and I think that the advice that you gave to your wife is actually really smart advice in how we assess risk. Because if you ask yourself, what's the worst thing that can happen? In many cases, the worst thing that can happen, let's go beyond careers. Asking somebody, I got a lot of people who regret not asking somebody out on a date. So you want to ask somebody out on a date, what's the worst thing that can happen? The person says no. And you're back where you are. Basically the worst case scenario and the status quo are identical. And that happens more often than we think.
One more point, just getting a little bit, today is actually Thursday, and we have our resident philosopher, Tom Morris, who normally sends in a vignette. So I tend to get a little philosophical when I know that he's on deck, and he sent in something today called Speckled Dog. So I'm going to ask you if you have time to hear his 2 minute and 25.
Lay it on me.
Okay, but before I do that, here's my philosophical thought. Can regret be forward? Can you actually? I mean, in terms of, we look back with regret, the things I didn't done, the inaction. Can regret be a forward-thinking type of decision state or behavior?
We can anticipate our regrets. I have a whole chapter on that.
So the answer is hell's yeah. Well, here is Tom Morris, who will be critiqued by Daniel Pink afterwards, called Speckled Dog.
Hey, everybody. So every day I post a philosophy on social media. I often come across a cute photo somewhere online and it sparks a thought, and I'll post it on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram, places like that. Well, here's a story I've got to tell you. A few days ago, I came across this picture of a dog, and I want to read you my post that I came up with right then. Here's my post. Step out there and be your brightly speckled self, your good, fine, beautiful, unself-conscious self. Those who show up without a fretful concern for their spots and splotches, the marks and designs that life has put on them, are able to be in the world and go about its fields of possibility with a purity that's rare and powerful. When we take a full and unhesitant ownership of who we are and wherever we might be, we can make our proper difference. That's a part of the reason we're here. Any mental reservations, worries, or anxieties simply dilute and diminish that potential impact. As Horace, a quite dogged poet, told us, fortune favors the bold. And maybe that's why it often paints us so boldly and distinctively in the first place. I hadn't looked at myself in the mirror when I wrote that the other day. And then I walked straight to the mirror to shave and noticed a big splotch on my face, a big spot of red inflammation for the first time in many years. I had a flaw on my face other than my normal features, of course. And I'm about ready to step in front of 600 people to give my first in-person talk in 2.5 years. And then, of course, I had to make this video to philosophize with you all. So I wanted to point out that it's one thing to have ideas. It's another thing to implement those ideas. And so, yeah, my brightly speckled self, look at this steroid cream on my face right now. I'm here. I'm bold, and I'm your philosopher. Happy thinking.
He's never looked so good, let me tell you. Yeah, he's a little under the weather, but wow, that vignette could not have been more perfect and more appropriate, I guess, for everything we spoke about, the boldness. If you have any doubt in your mind about going to CEX and about specifically to hear the riveting fireside chat between Mr. Brian Clark, who has been on the show, and Mr. Daniel Pink, you will regret not going. And I hope you will go, and I hope you will see it. And I hope you got a lot of inspiration from today. Remember, if you register for CEX and use the code Jaffe or Not Famous, you'll get $200 off your fee. You'll get a couple of drinks, and you'll get a walk on roll. If you'd like to find out more about Dan Pink, you can do that through a variety of means. He is quite findable. You can find him on Instagram at Daniel Pink. You can find him on Twitter at Daniel Pink. Please go and buy The Power of Regret, How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward. And of course, his website is danpink.com. Dan, thank you for your time so late at night.
Thank you for having me.
It was my pleasure. We have only one more thing to do, which is to find out what Chuck Norris had to say about regrets and about the author Daniel Pink.
You are Chuck Norris approved.
And we'll be back tomorrow. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye, Daniel.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing with your host, multiple author, and global keynote speaker, Joseph Jaffe. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show, and if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, visit josephjaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.